Hey everyone, welcome. Super excited to be here with you all today. My name is Sierra Harris and I am the author over at Sierra Harris Teaching, and really excited to jump into today's topic, which as you can see from below is all about spring mentor texts that you can use to teach reading skills in your classroom. Let's jump right in. All right, our first book tonight is what I consider a classic, absolute classic, and it is called The Bee Tree. I will have to preface this by saying I am terribly afraid of bees. And it's crazy because I grew up with a family who owned a landscaping business. Therefore, I was always outside in the nursery with all the shrubs and the trees and the flowers, which meant there were bees everywhere. So it's kind of ironic, but I related to this book and connected to this book in a very deep way, as I have a feeling many of your children will do as well. But this is actually by the world famous 𝗦cije𝗰𝗶𝗹. I'm sure you're all big fans of a lot of her books. And it's about this young girl and her grandpa. And the very beginning of the book, she is a little uninterested in her reading. And so Grandpa decides to take her on a hunt for finding the bee tree. And the bee tree is the tree that has the hive with all of the bees and the honey. And it ends up being this huge excursion that they go on. And all these other people end up joining them and they follow the bee. They end up trapping like 2 or 3 bees and they release them one at a time and they follow them as fast as they can. And all these other people end up joining. I'm sorry if there's like a glare on the book. All these other people end up joining, and it's this huge adventure that they end up going on. But eventually they release all 3 bees, and they end up finding the bee tree. You can see it there in the background. And then they gather all the delicious honey and everything. But the thing that I love most about the book is at the very end, they celebrate, and they have all these yummy goods. And of course, they have honey and biscuits. But at the very, very end, the grandfather talks to the young girl about, how much did she enjoy this wonderful adventure. And then he relates all of that by saying, you can find all of this in books. We don't have to go on these crazy adventures every day for you to have this experience. You can have it in books that you read every single day. And so the girl has this big epiphany, and she talks about how never again will she complain about her reading and how she enjoys finding the adventure in books now. And I think every teacher in the world should be forced to read this book to their children at the beginning of every year and talk about the adventures that they're going to go on. It's just a perfect read. And I love it for spring, of course, because it's about bees and, adventures and being outside, as well as having a wonderful message too. So I would use this book. I paired it with sequencing. And the reason why is because of the events that kind of unfold throughout the story with all of the people who join them on this adventure. Every single page you turn, there's new people joining in on the bee tree hunt that they're going on. So in your graphic organizer that I made for you, you do have just a little flow chart here, and I have labeled it beginning, middle, and end. But the trick is up here in the box are all of the people who join in on the hunt, and I actually have mixed them all up. So the students have to sequence the people in the order that they actually occurred in the book, but then they also have to take those and place them into whether they think that happened at the beginning, middle, and end. So for example, Mary Ellen and Grandpa would be the very first 2, and of course that happened at the beginning. So those would be the first 2 that they place, and then they would cross them out in the box, and then they would continue on. So they're kind of sequencing twofold. They're putting the people in sequential order of who joined the bee hunt, and then they're also taking those and putting them into whether they think they happened at the beginning, middle, and end. And there can be some discrepancy in there as well. There's kind of not a right or wrong answer, but it's a great conversation of what construes a book's beginning, what construes a book's middle and end, and those are great conversations to have when it comes to plot and sequencing. The second book tonight is actually a new one for me. It's one that I never got to read in my classroom, but once I got my hands on this, I knew I had to share it with all of you. But it is called The Curious Garden, and I am in love with this story. It is about this young boy who lives in a very dreary place. He lives in the city. There are no trees. It's just blah, right? Who would want to live there? But despite the fact that he lives there, he still enjoys being outside. He loves to explore, and he wishes that there was more to see kind of out in the world. So he ends up going out one day and he stumbles upon an abandoned train track and he finds this little patch of greenery that's kind of dying away. And so he decides to take care of it. But he finds out that he is not the best gardener in the world. He does not really know what he's doing. He tries a lot of different things, and he kind of figures out somewhat what works. And he sees that the garden starts growing, and so every day he comes back and he finds the garden kind of grows more and more, and it kind of expands along this railway here. But then, of course, as time happens, and I love that there's some pictures here with no words, and you just kind of get to see how this garden is expanding because of this young boy. But winter does come, and he has to kind of take a break, and he decides to spend this time prepping for the spring to come. So you can see him here reading a book. He kind of is gathering some materials. But the great thing about this book is all throughout it, students are making lots of different inferences. So that's why I have paired this book tonight with making inferences. So then spring comes and you can see he kind of picks up where he left off and the garden just grows exponentially. And the thing that I love then at the very end is that it talks about not only has the garden grew, but the fact that there now are a lot more gardeners in the city as well. So you can see the picture of all of the people in all the different rooftops and all the little children down below with all of their tools are all helping to pitch in and grow this beautiful garden. And then the very last image is of the city, but now what it looks like because of the little boy. And it's a very simple book, but it has a very powerful message behind it in a very unique way. So perfect for spring because hello, gardening, springtime, right? I can't wait to get all the plants planted in my own garden. So I did pair this one with making inferences. So I do have a graphic organizer ready for you. It's a very simple activity that you can do with your students. I would highly recommend redoing this graphic organizer on an anchor chart. That way you can make it more interactive with students and students can put post-it notes up, or you can have them have their own copy of the page. It's completely up to you. But instead of having the students practice making the inference, what I've done is a little different. I actually have the inference written down. I want your students to practice going back and finding text evidence and finding the schema that they could have used to make this inference, and that's what they're going to be recording. So here we've got the question, for example, why did most people spend their time indoors? The inference is that there was nothing to look outside. It does not state that in the book, but there is a piece of text evidence that they can go back and find, and then schema that they can find in their brain to then use to show that that's why that inference would be a correct inference to make based on that question. So this is the graphic organizer that I would use for the Curious Garden, and come on, go find this book if you have not already grabbed it for your own classroom library. All right, book number 3 tonight is a one called The Tree Lady. This one is unique because it's actually a biography. It's a book, and on the very, very, very last page, as if my pages would flip, it tells you a lot about the lady who the book is written about. The lady's name is Kate Sessions, and she has some great influence in the San Diego area. So if you're from San Diego or California, maybe you know of her or know her name. So it goes along and it introduces the character, and it's when she was young, and she talks about how she grew up in the woods of Northern California, and then she loved trees, she loved being outside. She was very different from girls. And the book does a really great job of exploring her as a character who is very different from typical girls in that time frame or in that time period. It said that she did well in school, and she enjoyed science, and again, that was unlike many girls. And then she grows up, and the whole story is again about how she's so uniquely different. That she loves trees, that she graduates from college. She ends up actually becoming a teacher and living in a place that has very, very little trees. Um, and so she decides to quit her job, and instead she makes a huge impact on the area, of which now is San Diego, because she decides to transform the city park. The city is hosting the Panama, California Exposition. See, that's why I didn't remember it. The Panama, California Exposition was coming to San Diego in the year 1915. It would be held at the city park, which the picture I just showed you of the city park was bare. So she decides to basically transform this park. Now, the reason that this park, it doesn't look like a park, is because San Diego, with very dry weather, kind of deserty, and not a lot of people thought that trees could grow here. But since she knew a lot about trees, she studied trees, and that's what her life was devoted to. She knew that she could make a difference here. So she spent years researching, going to Mexico, and the book kind of really describes this in a lot of detail. So she decides to go and find all of these trees that she knew would thrive in this type of environment. And all of her hard work pays off, and the fair comes to town, and it ends up staying open for 2 years. And just look at all those gorgeous trees. And then nowadays, it's called Balboa Park, is the name of the park. And she is called the mother of Balboa Park. And she continued to plant trees up until her death in 1940. And it's just a wonderful story about a real life human being who made such a unique difference in the world. And so I just love this book, one, because it is a biography, and we very rarely can find biographies like this that are written in a normal text structure, fictional type text structure, since it is easy for students to read and comprehend. But this one does that. And so I have paired this book with the skill of characterization because the book does a fantastic job of really showcasing the differences between Kate and the other women or the other people in that time period and how she was so unique, and then why those uniquenesses really made her who she was and how she made a difference in the world, and specifically in San Diego. So yes, this is a simple web, and yes, you can easily recreate this, and that's perfectly fine if you do. But what I want really, really love students to be able to do is to go back into the story after listening to it and find all of the evidence that the author has put in here about what makes Kate Sessions a unique character. What has made her stand out from all the other people in that time period? And you're going to find so much evidence in the story that the students are really going to be able to showcase. And then what you can even have them do is, because there is so much evidence, have them rank the evidence. Have them figure out what evidence impacts Kate's development over others. So if you think about her impact in the story and in the world, if this was her impact, then what piece of evidence do you feel made the most impact on her development as a character? So you can have some of these really grand discussions about this character in the story. So definitely make sure you grab this one. It's perfect for springtime when the trees are starting to bloom and life is coming back into the world. But make sure you have a space in your classroom to read all about the tree lady. This one's fun, definitely a different type of story than the one I just showed you, but this is called Sally Jean, the Bicycle Queen. If you have children like mine who love to be outside and who absolutely love to ride bikes, your kids are going to really be able to connect a lot to this story. And the one thing I do love about this story is that the little girl, throughout the story, she loves to make songs up about herself. So it's a really lively type of story. It's a really great read aloud. The students are going to want to go back and recreate the songs that you sing in the story. But anyways, the story starts out with little Sally Jean, and she's little, and she loves going on bike rides on the little back seat with her parents. Then she grows up and she gets the little tricycle, and she grows up even more and gets her own bicycle with wheels, or training wheels, and she just absolutely loves it. Then they take the training wheels off, and she's got her big girl bike, and she claims herself the bicycle queen because she can do all these tricks and all these wonderful things. But then as she gets bigger, she notices that she's having a lot of trouble riding the bike because the bike is just too small for her. But her parents can't afford a new bike. There's too many things going on, dentist bill, and, life happens, and she can't afford it. So instead, she finds another way, and she ends up volunteering for this neighbor who has a lot of junk. So she helps organize the junk, and she gets to keep some of it for her future bike. And then, but that really doesn't help because she still doesn't have a bike of her own. So she thought it was going to help solve a problem, but it really didn't. So then she decides, you know what? There's junk everywhere. What if I collected all this junk to try to recreate and build the bike myself? But she has all these skill sets because she's really good at repairing bikes because her parents taught her how. So she decides to open up a repair shop for other people's bicycles, and she makes pittance. She doesn't make very much money. She can't buy very much. She can barely buy the 2 tires, and so she's still kind of without a bike. So she decides to go search for junk, and she finds all the pieces that she needs, and then with the help of her family, she ends up building a bike that fits her. She repaints it, and now she's back to being Sally Jean, the bicycle queen. And it's just a really cute story, and it's got a lot of great events into it. And there's a lot of different skills that I would use to teach this book. And the reason I picked this one to share is because a lot of students can connect really well to it. But I would use this book to teach sequencing. And yes, I know I did give you a title already that had sequencing, but I promise you I vet these books very well for the skill that I think they're best used for, and they just so happen that 2 of the books were great for sequencing. So, I give you a simple flow chart because the story has a lot going on. There's a lot of events happening with, her being young and the stages of, of life at the beginning, to her outgrowing her bike, to her, volunteering to help her neighbor, then to her opening her shop, and then to her building her bike. There's a lot happening. So the reason I picked sequencing, and this pairs well with plot too, so you really could call it sequencing and plot, is because I want students to really focus on what are the most important events. So we have a lot happening in the entire story. Let's focus on the 5 most important events, and let's use those to reconstruct the plot. And so when you have a story like this that has so much going on, it may be difficult for students to kind of narrow down which are the most important to reconstruct the plot. And so if they don't use the correct events, the story's not going to make as much sense, or it's not going to be as strong as it could be. So this is a great one to get your students going back into that story, have some great arguments with their peers to figure out which 5 events make the cut, and then they put those into the graphic organizer, and then you can have some great discussions about why you picked certain events. Are they in the right sequential order? That kind of thing. So again, Sally Jean, Bicycle Queen, is definitely a must-have for every classroom this spring. And the next book is titled Floret. Love this book. It is very simple, but it's very powerful as well. And so basically it's about this little girl who moves into the city. You can make some great text-to-text connections with this one and The Curious Garden, by the way, if you read both of them. So this little girl moves into the city. She used to be in a place where there was lots of trees. She used to love to play outside amongst the gardens and the trees, but now she lives in the city and there's very little. She tries to recreate it as best as she can. She draws with chalk all of the wonderful things that she loves about outside, but the rain washes it away. So then she tries to have a picnic. You can see here she drew on the boxes. And she tries to recreate the outside. Look at all the boxes she drew on, right? How beautiful. But she finds that her daffodils go missing, aka the dad carries them away, and the tree gets knocked down, meaning the box got knocked over. So there's just a lot of problems. So she goes outside. She finds what she thinks is a place of that has like some greenery. You could see her with the binoculars. So her and her mom decide to go on a walk with her dog. And so she finds the place, but there's really not much there. There's some swings, some lampposts, some pebbles. So, not very fun because there's not a lot of greenery. So she sees a bird in what she calls an apple tree bird. So she decides to follow it because she thinks it will lead her to an apple tree. And instead, this is what she finds. And so it is a museum, a garden museum titled Floret, and it is closed, unfortunately. But she notices that there is a little something green popping out from the bottom of the door or the window frame or whatever you want to call this piece. And so she decides to take that with her and take it back to her house and do something with it. So I love this page because it shows her here. She's got her little plant and she finds a jar and she plants it and she's got two friends watching. Then down here, down here, she's continuing to take care of the plant and she's got more friends watching. And then the plant starts growing. And then on the next page, she's basically influenced all of her friends to kind of do the same thing and to grow all these unique plants. And so it's kind of spreading like wildfire. Now there's all kinds of greenery everywhere. And then on the very last page, again, she's influenced everyone to do the same. And now she has this wonderful place to play with her friends outside with lots of greenery. Again, lots of great text-to-text connections that you can make with this one in the Curious Garden. But again, I love this one for spring because, again, it's about new growth and new life and, being able to be outside. And specifically, I paired this book with Problem and Solution. And so I made for you here this little maze. And I love Problem and Solution mazes because it's a unique way for students to kind of showcase how characters end up at a solution, because a lot of times students think that there's a problem and the character does something and the problem is solved. The students need to really see the journey that characters go through, and this little girl went through a big journey to try to figure out the solution to her problem. So what I would do here is I would start at the maze, and it doesn't matter if the students start down here, start here, it doesn't matter. They would pick which box they want to start at and they would write the problem. And then they would go to the opposite box and they would write the solution, the final solution. So she finally got her outside location full of greenery to be able to play with her friends. And then what I would go back and have the students do is they write all of the different steps that the character took to be able to get to that final solution. And so it really helps encompass plot with problem and solution to show how the two really work together. So again, that's your free graphic organizer for problem and solution, and it's a unique way to really showcase and practice that, and then it pairs well with the book Floret. Then this one is called Seeds and Trees. This book is deep. If you are looking for a book for more upper elementary, and lower elementary kids, I think will understand this too. But if you really want to get into some deeper discussions in a very unique way, this is a go-to book. Seeds and Trees. I'm going to try to very quickly tell you what it's about. But it's about this little prince, and for every word that is spoken to him, he is given a seed. If the words spoken to him are kind words, nice, friendly, helpful words, the seed is a green seed. If the words spoken to him are unkind words, they're not nice, they're rude, they're mean, then the seeds given to him are black seeds. But regardless of the kinds of seeds he is given, based on all of the words that are spoken to him, he plants all of the seeds. He feels like he has a duty that he needs to, basically help nature, and he plants and gardens all of the seeds. And then it talks about how the green seeds grow into these beautiful, lush, here's the page, these beautiful, lush, and beautiful trees and flowers, and how kind they are, and how green they are, and how beautiful they are. But then the black seeds that he is given, they grow into these big, thick, thorny, black trees that are just very unfriendly and unkind. And that when he climbs the black trees, he has to battle through them. He has to, watch out for the thorns, and it makes him feel grumpy. And then when he climbs the green trees, he's very peaceful. It's a very easy journey. You can kind of see where I'm going here with all of the symbolism and everything that takes place. And the story goes on, and it is written in a poetry. That's another thing I love about this book. It is rhyming poetry throughout the entire story. Um, but eventually, the story keeps going, and he's noticing that the black trees are actually taking over some of the green trees in their roots. You can see the pictures down here where the roots are taking over some of the happy green trees. But he ends up meeting a friend, and this friend helps him through this journey, this battle that he's having with, I'm planting both of these trees. I'm trying very hard. All these words that are given to me are planted, and I have all these black trees and all these green trees, but the black trees are just kind of overtaking everything. So this friend kind of helps him figure out how to get rid of the black trees. And so she teaches him here how to basically bury and break the trees and cut them down and get rid of the roots, and to leave only the green roots. And then so from now on, she basically tells him, when you get these black seeds, don't plant them, throw them out, cast them away, and you will only be left with the green trees. And so that's what he does, and he's left with this beautiful kingdom full of green trees. My mind was blown the first time I read this book, because it is deep, deep. It is deep. So if I know you haven't read it, clearly I just gave you a very, very quick synopsis, but you can clearly see all the symbolism that is taking place inside the story. So we have the green seeds that represent the very kind words. And when they talk about those being planted, they mean within us, right? He really means within us, within our soul, within our hearts. And then how they grow and help make us feel beautiful and wise and friendly and kind. But the black seeds, they also get planted in our hearts, but they don't make us feel very good, right? They kind of take over things, and they can grow into very yucky, very mean thoughts. But then we have this beautiful, kind friend who teaches us how to instead of putting them here and taking them to heart, how we just need to cast them away and get rid of them and never think of them again. And there's so many wonderful self-love lessons here. So many wonderful lessons about, the power of words, and how kindness can prevail, but how, people who are ugly or say ugly things to us, how those words can take a toll, and what we can do to get rid of them. And it's written in a beautiful, poetic way. Wow, right? So I did pair this one with symbolism, believe it or not. And even if you are a younger grade, even if you are teaching first and second grade, I guarantee you your kids will get this. I did a very simple graphic organizer because, again, I don't know what grade you'll be using this with. But all I want you to have your students do is to go back through this book and find the 4 biggest symbols. So those are going to be your green seeds, your black seeds, your green trees, and your black trees. And then figure out what those actually represent, and what is the significance of that in the story. And then have those conversations with your students about, what this means in the story, but then really what it means in our own lives and what we can learn from this beautiful story. So this is your free graphic organizer. If you get and grab any of the books tonight, make it this one. This book is just profound. I love it. I love it. I love it. This one is called Everything You Need for a Treehouse. If you are like me, when you were a kid, you died. You really wanted to have a treehouse, right? It was the one thing I wanted. I never got it. Clearly, I turned out fine. It's all right. but every kid in your room will say that they would love to have a treehouse. So this book is also written in prose, and it is kind of a more difficult read. I would consider this a complex text for multiple reasons. It is very abstract. Um, it's not written in a typical story structure in any way, shape, or form. It's not, where it's like characters introduced, problem, solution, none of that. But it's also not nonfiction as well. So it's a fictional story, but in a very different story structure. So you may have to read it 2 times before your students really kind of understand the story and what the author is trying to do here. But basically, it starts out by saying everything that you need to make a treehouse starts with time and looking up. And then it goes into all the things that you need and all the different ways your treehouse can be different. But like I said, it's written in prose. So it's not it's not your typical story structure. But it is beautifully written. The description that the author gives when they are writing, and then, of course, the illustrations themselves are just beautiful. Of course, you'll need a swing, or maybe a rope, some twisted twine, a spun of sugar and sap, a way to climb and sprawl out on a limb and slide back down again. So in a very unique way, the author just talked about, some of the accessories that you're going to want for your treehouse. The swing, the rope, the twine, but then it says like a spun of sugar and sap, a way to climb and sprawl out on a limb and slide back down again. And then it's paired with this beautiful picture. So as I would read this, I would pair this with 2 things. I gave you a graphic organizer for just one of them, but I really would pair it with 2 different things. I would pair it with visualization, but then I would also pair it with vocabulary because the vocabulary in this book is just amazing. So having your students go back and find words that really stood out to them, words that really described and helped them see, but then also having them, as you read it for the first time, having them go through and being able to visualize. So I would read it and I would stop on maybe the 3 most significant pages, and I would read that page 2 or 3 times and really allow the descriptiveness of that page to sink in, and then have my student illustrate what they see in their minds on that page, and then do that 3 different times throughout the story. And then again, I would read it twice because it's, like I said, it's complex. And then I would show the pictures the second time and have the students see the difference in their illustrations and what they saw in their minds versus what they see in here. And then I would have some really great conversations about the vocabulary and about how this story is different from others and what makes it, easy to read or hard to understand. And have those great conversations about with when we find ourselves in books like this that are a little bit different, what does that mean we have to do as readers? That may mean we need to reread more, we need to slow down, we need to use more context clues, more visualization, try harder to make connections, different things like that, and have that really strong conversation with your students after you've read this book a few times, because this is a great book to show that not all stories are going to be as simple and as structured as we are used to them being. It's great to have unique books like this in your classroom to really expose students to those different types of story structures and different complex texts that present themselves in a more picture book type form than a passage type form. So definitely grab this one. Again, perfect for visualization and perfect for vocabulary. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope you have a fantastic night. Thanks.